For over 20 years, the Fire Store has equipped first responders with the best in firefighting gear. Discover seasonal savings on the gear you trust and visit thefirestore.com to shop everything but the truck.
Good evening, good morning, or good afternoon, depending on wherever and whenever you are listening. I will always start with gratitude and thank everybody for tuning in to the Perspectives on Leadership podcast brought to you by Fire Engineering. I'm your host, Steve Shaw. I'm proud to be a Deputy Fire Chief for the Town of Jupiter Fire Rescue Department. I'm also very proud to be part of the Fire Engineering family as an author, as a presenter at FDIC, and as a host for this podcast. I always say it at every episode, and I'll keep saying it till I stop doing these, and it's thank you. Thank you for listening to these episodes of the Perspectives on Leadership podcast. You have a whole host of podcasts that are out there that you can listen to, and I will do always my justice to keep this information relevant and timely and beneficial for the people that are listening. Thank you to David Rose, thank you to Diane Rothschild, and to the Clarion team for allowing me to keep this going. And thank you to my Chief Donato, for allowing me to continue this platform as I do my best to give back value to the fire service. So, I was coming up at the end of the year. It's December 2025, and I'm starting to plan for the end of the year, starting to plan for the final podcast for the year. And it's amazing what kind of catches your eyes, right? It's amazing what kind of gives you that moment of pause. So recently I was looking at an article written by Stephanie White, who is recently retired from Fairfax County, Virginia as a firefighter, and now is the full-time editor-in-chief for Firefighter Nation. And something she wrote caught my attention. The article was part of her Off the Cuff series, and it was titled Coffee, Cold Mornings, and Farewell. And the title, first of all, just drew me right in. So I dove into the article and was reading it. And, it had a lot to do with her transitioning from where she was in the fire service to her current position. And one comment really stuck with me. And it was, and I'm going to read it here because I wrote it down. It was, one recent cold morning, I watched the sun come up as I stood in my station hoodie with a cup of coffee. And just that visual really just had me reflecting on so many things, from retirement, from the job, to the journey through this career, and especially legacy. So I kept going down the rabbit hole, as I typically do. The first podcast I did here on fire engineering for this Perspectives on Leadership was back in August of 22, and it was on the topic of legacy with Captain Bill Gustin. And, I reflected on that podcast, and I think that it might be counterintuitive for someone to think, well, why did you start your first episode with legacy? But I actually disagree. I think I'm stuck on that idea of beginning with the end in mind. And that's from Stephen Covey's book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. It was echoed in the Scott Thompson's recent work. But it's in my mind a lot. And additionally, as most people that are listening to the podcast know, I'm on this incredibly interesting journey where we're building a fire department from the ground up with this amazing team over here in the town of Jupiter. And out of all the people that are reaching out, a lot of them are, let's say, into their career, well into their career, approaching retirement, or maybe even retired. And the stories they have of either them wanting to stay in the job or those that have left and really want to get back into the job because they miss it so much. All those conversations are gold. So I'm sure we'll be talking about that. But before I introduce or have Stephanie introduce herself, there was 3 things I was thinking about as I prepare for this podcast. And by the way, the reason we were even doing this is I called Stephanie after that article and we were talking. I was like, listen, that image of that coffee cup hit me hard. So she agreed to join me on today and kind of talk about her journey and just legacy in general. And I'm excited to have her. But these are the 3 things I was thinking about. First of all, the idea of intentionally building legacy. It's one of those words that gets thrown around. But when we talk about that, what does that look like? What does legacy look like? How does one define legacy? And what things go into building that? And I'm looking forward to kind of going back and forth with her and her, interpretation of that. The second thing was planning an exit strategy. Life goes on after the fire service. And I'm finding that a lot of people, and myself included, when I was approaching my end at Fort Lauderdale, didn't plan it as much as I could have done. And again, a lot of the stories I'm hearing from people that are interested in rejoining the fire service are very interesting. The third one is the idea of focusing on others. At the end of the day, it's all about them, right? We say that a lot. It's about them, not us. And we talk about those that have really done a good job in, let's say, working on their legacy. The ones that I talk to the most that are more comfortable and more just find reward in this journey are the ones that really dove into other people. So I wanted to chat with that. So Stephanie, thank you for joining me. I appreciate you jumping on, and I would love if you could just introduce yourself to the people out there if they have not heard of you, but I'd be surprised about that. So please dive on in.
First off, thank you for having me. Sorry, it was light out when you and I started this journey, and now it's dark because it started snowing. So sorry, it looks like a cave in here. My name is Stephanie White, as you've so wonderfully pointed out, and I'm the editor-in-chief of Fire Engineering's little sibling publication, Firefighter Nation, where we focus on everything culture-related. My bio. I spent the last 20 years as a career firefighter paramedic out in an area right outside of DC, Fairfax County, Virginia. Spent a couple years volunteering before that. And I mean, really, I think if you want to get any further than that, you can find it plastered all over my off the cuffs. There's nothing that's been off limits with my career or my story that isn't in there. So I'll leave the spoiler alerts there.
Gotcha. Well, first of all, you said it was snowing there?
It is. It got dark. It's beautiful. It's snowing. It's probably about 30 degrees down here in Richmond, Virginia.
Interesting. When I get home, I might actually jump in my pool, just so you're aware, in case it gives you any difference.
I was noticing the difference between the Irish skin and the tan that's going on there, and that was bad enough. So thank you for really rubbing it in.
I do what I can. You're welcome. I do what I can. So, like I said, I think that the reason I wanted you to come on is the article you posted recently, and it kind of got me thinking about the journey in the fire service and legacy and whatnot. But walk me through this, I guess, with your journey with Fairfax. What does that look like in terms of like what got you in there, what that journey looked like, and then where you are now? If you can summarize that into somewhat.
Make that 60 seconds?
Yeah.
What got me into the fire service? So I was very fortunate, grew up in the Metro DC area. Parents were DC born and bred, so got to do a lot of humanitarian work in my early teen years. I wanted to go into some sort of medicine, traveling medicine, got to do a different humanitarian trip every year of high school and noticed just the medical disparities overseas. And was sitting there talking to one of my friends one night, and I said, I think I'm going to become a nurse, but that kind of sounds, no offense to any nurses, kind of sounds boring. What else could it be? And my buddy piped up and he said, well, I'm an EMT. And I said, well, what the heck is that? So fell into medic school and realized that in order to become a career medic, I figured, I'll do 5 years of that and then go work with an NGO. I realized I had to become a firefighter. So got hired on, and that first burn, just having to do all that physical work and having that much fun, I realized, I'll reserve my Irish language, FEMS, whatever this is the most fun I've ever had in my life. And that really started the journey that is Fairfax. So got hired on right out of high school and out of medic school, and here we are at the end.
It's so fascinating the way you just described that, because you said you started off as a medic first and then realized you had to be a firefighter to actually practice the skill in the field. Is that what I'm hearing?
Mm-hmm.
Because that is literally opposite of my story. Most people down here in South Florida, they want to be firefighters, right? So they go to fire school and they realize, oh man, if I want to get hired in South Florida, I'm at least going to have to be an EMT.
You have to get your ALS.
Probably a paramedic. So they go to paramedic going, well, I guess I'll go. And based on that, you have different trajectories. For me, I didn't like it at the beginning. Now I love it. I absolutely love being a medic. I wouldn't have the memories and the history and the experiences without having been a medic. But it's just so funny that it's literally the opposites, the beginning stages that you just described.
It's nice where I am because, well, apologies. See, I've only been retired for a couple of weeks, so we're gonna slip up. It was great because you did a week, or what we called a tour on the box, and then moved over to the engine. So you always got to have fun, whether it be getting to run 3 days worth of EMS calls and then being sick and tired of it and getting to go hang out on the engine for the next week and go have some fun. I think that's the best of both worlds.
So you mentioned that you just recently retired from the job, and I did the same relatively recently in Fort Lauderdale before coming here to the town of Jupiter. So as you were approaching retirement, what was that like for you? What was that experience like as you approached that day?
So it became the stages of grief bargaining. So fast forward to last April, David Rhodes approached me and said, "Hey, we are revitalizing Firefighter Nation. We would like you to come on board and run that for us." And I said, "Well, I'm not done with my career yet. Give me at least another year and I'll hit 20." So as time got closer and closer to the exit point, and David Rhodes got really excited that he wasn't going to have to do my homework and take my meetings anymore for me, I started to do some bargaining of, well, what if I go to a slower firehouse? If I'm not getting my teeth kicked in at night, I'll be able to focus more. I'll be able to get more done. How about if we do that? And he kind of gave me the look. And I said, okay, back to the drawing board. We have something called part-time flex, which is you give up your benefits, but you're only working half the hours and you get to schedule your own hours. I said, what if I do that? Right? We still want me to be connected to the fire service. It makes sense. I'll just do that. And he gave me that look too. So that was when I realized, listen, it's probably time to hang it up and to move on. And luckily and unluckily, as I mentioned in that article, I end up getting injured, which it wasn't just that injury. It was the whole year up to year 20. I really noticed my body starting to break down. Anytime I go to throw a ladder, my left shoulder was completely subluxing out. So the arm was just dangling there and I'd have to pop it back in, which really, really hurt. So the road to retirement was just this 6 months of kind of hitting these mental benchmarks of a little bit of dread and doom in some categories and a little bit of relief in other categories. I can't describe the ride, I think, in a way that would be useful to anyone other than it's a very strange road. It's an incredibly odd mixture of emotions. And really, grief is the best word that I can come up with to describe as the most frequent feeling. Was just a little bit of grief. Nothing overwhelming, nothing debilitating, but just a weird sort of sorrow in a way. So that was the last 6 months that led up to where we are now.
Was it a sorrow because you weren't going to be able to do all those things again? Did you think, like in terms of the skills and the calls and those kind of things?
It was everything. I think it was the way that I was leaving injured was sad. Nobody imagines leaving, popping a couple discs out. Definitely missing my shift. That was the biggest one. And then realizing, hey, you've run your last call. I think that's the weirdest feeling ever. Realizing that you're never going to get on a rig again and just go to work and go have fun. And I think even when you know it's coming, even when you're prepared for it, it's a weird, vast stillness is the best way I can describe it. When you finally sit still and realize that was my last call. That was my last run. That's my last time ever getting on a rig.
So it has me, first of all, I think the one statement you said there, going to work and having fun. And I think that when I look back on when I was on shift, even now when I was on days for the last time, or even for a while now, I've gone to work and have a good time. I've always, especially on shift. Oh my gosh, how do you not have a good time? If you're not having a good time on shift, something's wrong, right? The people you get to meet, the meals, the kitchen house banter, there's just so much there, right? And I think that another thing I was thinking about is the idea that a lot of us are like, oh, I have to run on a call. No, you get to run a call. The more people I'm talking to, Stephanie, I swear, especially the ones, and you mentioned it before, that are let's say not working because it wasn't their choice. They miss this job something fierce because they don't get to do what they love doing. And a lot of times, whether it's the abundance of calls or the politics or whatever, maybe that gets in the way and clouds things. But when it's gone, sometimes, and it leaves a hole. It leaves like a little gap where you're like, oh man, I crave that. But I think about those things. I think about what you just said, and I was talking to a firefighter recently, and he was just relaying his day on the shift where he was at, and he was just, just the standard banter, like, I had a bunch of calls, I had to go to all these calls, I had to run this. I'm like, bro, listen, man, you get to run these calls. I'm telling you, man, one day you're not going to think this way. But that's what it had reminded me of those things, of the idea that while we're here, we don't realize sometimes the joy that comes with all these things. And even on the bad days, the joy of getting to do and practice what we went to school for,
Right.
Yeah. So going back through, like, as you glance back at your career, and I do this a lot now, and speaking of, I'm asking this in terms of the legacy, like as we're thinking about ourselves and thinking about the people maybe we've touched through the course of the year, when you look back in your career, when you think about the people that have left some positive vibes with you, let's say, and have left good legacies, what did that look like? Like, who comes to mind that you can refer back to, and why do they stick in your mind?
It was the people that took the time, especially as we get older and we understand how precious time is. When you start as a young 19, 20-year-old, you have all the time in the world. You don't have kids yet. You don't have a ton of responsibilities. You get to sleep on your day off. As we get older and we see how we don't have time, and we see the leaders and the people who they take the time to pick up the phone, or they take the time to explain something, or they take the time to advocate or break down and teach, you realize how much they truly care. Just sharing your time is the biggest source of caring, I think, in this environment, in this day and age. And those were the ones who really left their mark, is those who took the time to stand by you, stick by you, just anything that involved their time and energy. It was always such a powerful message.
I think that right there is probably the most powerful statement that this conversation is going to have, is about the time, sharing your time. And of all the things that are valuable to us, the tangibles, let's say, time is one of those things we don't get back. Time is, once it's gone, you're never going to get it back. Every time I'm doing a presentation, I always tell the crowd I'm teaching, or the people that are in the audience, or the people in my class, I'm like, guys, I'm going to get started and we're going to get into this, but I will promise you one thing: I will not waste your time. Time is one of those things that's so, so valuable. And to that point, you're right. Those people that took the time that they gave of themselves to you and spent their time, you're right. That is extremely, extremely valuable. It's a very positive way to look at and we're talking about like tangibles. Like I mentioned before we started this, when Bobby Halton gave me the permission to do this podcast, he's like, Steve, you can talk about whatever you want, but you have to make sure the people that are listening can get something out of it and use it in the real world, not just theory, but practical application, right? But that's it right there, the time. Like giving your time to somebody else, not just assuming they know something, or maybe mailing it in, or whatever you want to extrapolate on that is, but just giving the time, because that is probably one of the most valuable commodities we have right now. So I'm very happy that you went there with the value of time.
Here to help.
Yeah. Are there any, like for you, are there any specific people that come to mind? Like I know for me, I got a list of people that I could just go on all day, but is there anything like for you that just sticks out?
Absolutely. I probably had the same central 5 people throughout my career that were just the people, not only their time, but graciousness is another word that comes to mind. Of you could screw up, you could be an absolute D-bag because you're having a bad day, whatever. They were realistic with their expectations of you as a human being. And their advice was based off of that, of, hey, you're going to screw this up. I'm not going to demand excellence of you. I'm not going to be judgmental when you fall. My very first captain in the academy was actually somebody that I ended up being close friends with after I graduated. And got to know him as a human being and not that scary guy always yelling at you. And just the humility and the down to earth resilience that he always taught through everything of, hey, this is just a phase. This is just a moment. This isn't the thing to focus on. It was really what set the stage and the tone for my career, I think. And then that torch just got passed on to other mentors that I came across. My battalion chief for the battalion that I retired out of, when I first, right after I first got there, he came on board. And he was one of these people who I must have kicked open the door. And actually, it wasn't even fully closed ever. The 3/4 that the door was open, I would always kick it open the other quarter with the 2 cups of coffee in my hand about 5 times a day saying, hey, I have an idea. And no matter what he was doing, he would sit down, grab a cup of coffee and say, all right, Steph, what you got? And that kind of stuff. Those people who were willing to say, this woman is absolutely crazy, but she has ideas. Let's figure out how to nurture it and hone it. I would say the people who taught me how to aim my voice were the ones that just left such an impact. Not raise my voice, because we're firemen. We can all yell, hoot, holler, scream, and raise our voices. But the ones who had the patience to teach me how to aim my voice were the ones that just left that impact.
So as you're saying that, a lot of times when I'm doing presentations, one of the first questions I'll ask is like, write down on a piece of paper, and I usually hand out papers and kind of guide the presentation along, but give me somebody that impacted you. Give me the person that's impacted you through the course of your career. And so I do that for 2 reasons. One, at the end of certain presentations, I ask them, well, listen, if I'm doing this 5 years from now, 10 years from now in the same department, and so I ask the same question, will you be on that list? It's a very impactful way to end that, because it gets you thinking about what am I doing to land myself on this person's list one day. But 2, it gives me so many ideas and remembrance of kind of what you said about people giving their time. And one of the weirdest examples, I don't know why this got brought up, but I used to work as a nurse in Plantation General Hospital near where I used to live. So your comment on nursing before, I totally feel it, just so you know. So I used to work as a nurse in a hospital years ago when I first started. And there was this doctor there. His name was Dr. Gabriel. And he was kind of it wasn't rough around the edges, but he was a smart ass, right? He was just a smart ass. And I think he knew I was a medic, and he kind of we had a little banter. But at one point, he kind of knew that I was there and I wanted to learn. Okay, I saw that I was there not because I just want the extra paychecks. I wanted to learn more. I want to be better at my job. I want to be a better medic. I want to be a better responder. And he saw that. I don't know what exactly led him to see that, but he saw it. And at some point, as we're assessing patients, a patient would come in. I'm doing basic blood pressure and all that kind of stuff. And he would look at me and go, all right, Steve, what test should I order? And I'm like, what? I don't know. He goes, well, what do you think? What kind of test do I order? And I was caught off guard at first. And I'm like, well, maybe you should order a Chem 7 and a urinalysis. Well, why? I'm like, I don't know, because you usually do it. And he goes, that's not the answer. And I thought, this guy's being a real jerk to me. But after a while, it became the norm with him. He would ask me as we would assess patients, well, what should I do? Should I order Chem 7, Chem 12? Should I order a UA? Blah, blah. And it changed the way I thought, because he, like you said, took the time to kind of just ask me a few extra questions before he did what he was going to order anyway. But he included me in that. And I got to tell you, the growth that was for me, I just grew so much with that little relationship. And he was still a smart ass to me, which I appreciate to this day. It was funny as all hell. But I remember him doing that. And I said, well, what am I doing on my end to do that with my crew? How am I challenging them? How am I causing them to think? Just a few extra seconds just to challenge them in the same way. Are there situations where I could do that to where I'm causing them to think? And I remember just that positive impact that he had on me. But that was, for me, the legacy he left on me. So kind of the same way you were talking about those people that spent the extra time, right? And it wasn't a lot of time. So it's just enough to where it resonated, right?
It doesn't take much. And I think that's something people don't realize. We, as type A personalities, we think in such grand gestures, but if I only need to scream for 180 seconds into the phone with frustration and anger, guess what? That's just 2 minutes of your day. It's those who are just willing to give you that time. You end up realizing how little time they have. And so you don't take all of it because you realize they're probably giving so much to so many people.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just being willing to give that tiny amount of time that lands such a powerful punch.
No, I'm so glad you went there. I actually was jotting that down a second ago in terms of the fact that some of the smallest things aren't very small to others. Tangible example. Years ago, I was at my firehouse and I was at home one day and I decided to make a bunch of door chocks, just a bunch of little door wedges for my team. I was carving up old wood and I was chopping up wood. I'm like, you know what, let me just get rid of this. And I turned them all into little door chocks. I cut them all into little angled chocks. I spray painted them red, put little zip ties on them and just brought them in for the station. So I gave one to each member of the crew. And I gave them to a couple of the floats that came through. Okay, this one guy, Ariel, he was coming through. I gave him one as well. And it's interesting because to me, it was a scrap piece of wood I was going to get rid of anyway, right? To me, so it wasn't much. It was a door chalk. And I remember one day, this is like years later, Ariel came to work with me on days for a little while. And he brought it up. He goes, hey, remember that door chalk? I'm like, yeah. He goes, that wasn't the door chalk. When you gave me that door chalk, I was part of the team. That was my realization that I was part of that team. So for him, it was his introduction into our solid team we had back in the day. To me, it was a door chalk. Just, it's interesting the different perspectives on things, right? How, from my view, is something very small to him. It was not small. And there's a lot of those examples out there. So I'm glad you brought up that, to your words, it doesn't take much sometimes.
It's funny you say that because on the flip side of the coin, there are so many people throughout my career who just being so I know you've probably seen me with 20 different hair colors. The real hair color is ginger. Just being an angry little 20-year-old redhead and saying something off the cuff, no pun intended, and just a throwaway little sarcastic remark and not thinking anything of it. And I found out almost in my 40s that, people had these stories the first time I met Stephanie, and it was always me just throwing something sarcastically rude off the cuff that I thought nothing of, but just that was people's intro to me. And they were like, whoa, this person's a jerk. So it doesn't take much either way. Little moments of annoyance or anger or little moments of kindness, those can unwittingly, they seem so small to us, become your entire legacy. And we don't realize.
And it works both ways too. We're going on stories here, but I think these are good ones. There was this guy who used to work in Fort Lauderdale as a driver. He was a firefighter, but he moved away to Missouri because his wife moved and he moved with her. And he ended up getting a job over there. His name is Chris, and he works in, I think, Valley Park, Missouri. He's a great guy. We still maintain contact with each other, but not because we're friends. This is the funny part. One day I'm doing one of these podcasts, right? And I happen to talk about the legacy or leadership or something. And Chris decides to text me. This is like 10 years after I've seen him last, right? And actually, it's funny, I actually saved the text because it was that, I'll call it impactful. In fact, I saved it. It's right here. So I won't read it because you'll understand why. But I saved this long ass text. I'm showing you this screen right now. So he hears the podcast. He texts me, hey, I haven't talked to you in a while. I heard you talking about this, and this. Oh, by the way, I remember this one time where you did this. And he goes on to just rant on how I did something really stupid. He was very offended by that, like deeply. And he was just, when he left, he left with me like in a bad way. I was a jerk to him. And he texted me this. And I called him back. And I'm like, bro, you were going to get a phone call, right? And we talked for like an hour. And I'm like, buddy, I don't even remember what I did. Your situation you're describing, I don't even remember it. So not only was it not only small, I didn't even realize it. But whatever I did, it pissed him off in such a way, that's what he remembered. But now we're good. Like we talk all the time, and we're all good. But it was just one of those things where you're right. Sometimes you might even know the little things you do that impact other people in such a very powerful way, whether good or bad.
Good or bad. That becomes your legacy.
Yeah, exactly. So like I said, and always thinking about Chief Halton, he always talked about tangible ways to do things. So as we're thinking about like the job and the career and where we are, if we were talking to other people right now, the people that were listening to this, what would you suggest if there was tangible ways to, let's say, work on that? Like if you wanted to leave a positive legacy, what does that look like? What would be some of the things we would recommend to people? What do you think? Where's your mind go?
So it's so funny because the people that I truly heard fretting and worrying about their legacy were the people to me, and I don't mean conversations like this, I mean truly obsessed with it, verbalized it often. Well, this is going to be my legacy. That's going to be my legacy. Were always the people that were just the most selfish people I had ever met. And so when you said, hey, let's talk about legacy, that was the only really direction I had ever heard that word used in. And so I truly had to stop and think about it and reframe the way I thought about legacy. And to me, you don't have control over how people choose to remember you. You have power over how you choose to advocate and treat others. Leadership is the most potentially unfulfilling relationship in the world. And I say that when you're married, when you have kids, when you have friendships, you put sacrifice into those relationships because those relationships are very close to you and you get so much out of them. Leadership is the art of doing something painful, awkward, time-consuming, whatever, that is right for the other person. You're not doing it for you. You're doing it because you're literally leading another person, right? And you have to do what's right for them in that moment. And that's not necessarily something that's going to have a positive effect on your day. You might be taking flack from above for it, whatever it is. Doing the right thing, as simple as it sounds, doing the tiny things, giving the time, giving the patience. You can't control how people choose to remember you, but you can leave a path. And I think when I think of legacy, to me, it's the path that we leave for others through those micro things.
That's I like that in terms of going back to the something we talked about in the beginning about others and it's not about yourself. I like also the statement that you don't have control over your legacy. I think that's something impactful as well. I was was in terms of thinking about those that like have impacted me, and I think about something. Let's say in terms of like the FDIC or fire engineering, some of the ones that gave of their time, and I always go back to Gustin on this just because he kind of helped me out and was one of my mentors. But one of the things he was big on was just making you feel super special. Like he was in some cases like the let's say God's gift to fire, if you want to say it, or fire service royalty. Let's put it that way. But you never felt like that when you were talking to him, and he was always putting it back on you. He was always making sure you were doing something. Like it was about you, and I think that, like for myself, I look back and I think there was a point in my life where I loved getting the accolades. I love getting the letters behind my name. And this was like years ago where I'm like, ooh, I got a certificate. Ooh, it's shiny. It's new. Ooh, I got a new award. Oh, yay. And I think I felt better years later when it was now about kind of putting my people in those positions where they can get the award and they can get the accolades. And now it's my favorite thing. I love seeing others succeed. And we have these talks all the time here with the group I'm with building this fire department. All of us have, we've got the accolades, we've got the trophies, we got the little, the challenge coins there and all these things. I got 97,000 challenge coins. I don't need any more. It's going to break this shelf over here, right? And we're good. Like we don't need it. And now it's all about others. Like it's literally about others. We're no longer about ourselves. We always talk about the next group coming in and how we can just dump into them, like just dump into them. we're so excited about that. And it's just such a good feeling watching others succeed. And one step further from that, my brother and I, we both have young kids, and his one of his kids is already an explorer. And then my little kid, my 12-year-old, one of them just said to me the other day, he's like, Daddy, I think I want to be a firefighter. That level of responsibility, like, oh my gosh, like, how do I get this? How do I dump into him to make him a good person and then ready for this job? So yeah, it is about others, and I think that if we focus on that, I would say, I'm not a psychologist like my wife, but I would say that kind of does it itself. I think that if we focus on ourselves, others, other than self, focus on other people and them, it kind of builds itself. And when I look back, it seems as if a lot of the people, and I'll just use this example here, a lot of the people that I get to talk to and interview over the last, like, say 6 months, the ones that seem the most comfortable in themselves and confident and at peace, let's say, are the ones that when you ask them, hey, who have you mentored through your career and what are they doing? They're able to give you a lot of examples, just tons of examples instead of just like theory, if that makes sense.
Makes
So I'm glad,
sense.
yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that part right there. So yeah, in terms of, and so you like me, you're deep involved in the fire service right now, especially with your position. You're seeing a lot of people. You're let's say in a different realm, but you're not only from your previous position, but being with Firefighter Nation, you get to see a lot of people and talk to a lot of people. For you, in general, are you seeing any trends out there? Like, what are some trends that you're seeing out there that you can identify that are meaningful to this conversation, let's say?
Yes and no. And I say yes and no because every time I think something is a trend, I go, wait a second, we've seen this before. And we have. Human behavior is cyclic at best. We do the same things over and over in the fire service about every 10 years. I would say my biggest concern for this conversation is isolation. And I think if you want to build a legacy right now, your best and biggest way to do that is to bring kitchen tables back to firehouses. Because no matter the age, it can be a room full of 40-year-olds. You walk in and this is occurring. The cell phone, everybody's got one out. And I think it's only going to get worse. And I know this sounds like some old person ranting and raving in a nursing home, but it's true. And it is going to start to have an impact on absolutely everything. My last house was a busy perby house, so I was able to see that in some ways. And I don't think we've ever seen that before. I think that's the new thing. Is we've never had really a way to self-isolate before. If somebody went in the bunk room and was hiding all day, everybody knew, okay, something's going on, and somebody dragged them out and talked to them, right? Now it's socially accepted to just isolate yourself in your little world while everyone's sitting next to you self-isolating. So if people are ever truly concerned about building a legacy, just start busting down those little micro walls at your kitchen table and you'll build a legacy. Because figuring out how to draw firemen out and bring them back together in a way that we had when I started is going to be the next great challenge.
So it's interesting that I'm reflecting on some times where I was at a station years ago, and it was the norm for the station for some people that were norms of that station to just after lunch or even whenever there was downtime, just go away, just go into the rooms, just separate and do something on their own. And me, at the time, I was young, dumb, piss and vinegar. I wanted to train every day, and I would drag everybody out to do something. Like, all right, guys, we're pulling lines or pumping hoses. We're doing something. And I remember initially being almost like not afraid to, but just like, is this driver going to hate me for doing this? What the hell? We'll give it a shot. And I swear to you, 6 months later, at the end of the year, he came to me and he goes, I'm so glad you got me out of my room. I'm so glad you pulled me out and made us do things together. This is one of the best years I've had. And I swear it was like, thank you for validating all that hard work. But I'm so glad he said that because sometimes you don't know, but and just it worked. So to your point, that's So we need that, I think.
We want to have fun. We don't want to be, I think so many times when people go off into the bunk room, I think they're bored. If you were all sitting there having fun at the kitchen table, nobody's going to get up and go. I mean, my shift, we had brain power hour. It's what we called at 7:00, Jeopardy, Wheel of Fortune, all that. And you could hear the screaming all across the firehouse. Nobody's getting up and leaving that. Somebody might pull out a cell phone occasionally, but nobody's getting up from the table because they don't want to. Mm. When self-isolation is going on, it's either because of boredom or there might be something a little deeper that somebody needs to have a conversation with them about. But if you're having fun, nobody's leaving.
It's funny, my boss always says, Steve, we're going to create this fire department that the community loves, and the people that they get to come to work here love to come into work. And part of that is, he always says, he wants them to have fun. Like, to your point, we want to come to work and do this wonderful job, but we want to have a good time doing it too. And there's a ton of ways to do that. So for you, I always ask this question. I think you kind of answered it, but I'll ask it again. For you, are there any issues in the fire service that keep you up at night?
The issue that I kick and scream about that keeps me up at night is, and I'm trying to think of the best way to put this into words to make it digestible for everyone. Leaders who don't lead. And what I mean by that is we've created a world where everything is visible. So when we first came into the fire service, you were the chief of a fire department and people knew you were the chief of a fire department because of an article in the newspaper or because they met you somewhere, whatever it is. Now people can come into leadership spots and create this whole celebrityhood for themselves on the internet in one of the many different organizations that are out there that they can go be a president of, whatever it is. You can go become a mini fire service celebrity instead of leading. And that's a new world that didn't exist. And it couldn't have existed because we didn't have social media and some of these other organizations. That's the kind of thing that keeps me up at night. And the reason it is my biggest heartache isn't just because you aren't just doing damage at that moment. You are making all the future leaders below you not want to step up and lead. You're making them shut down because in their mind, well, if you're not willing to protect me, if you're not willing to guide me, if you're not willing to lead me, then I'm just going to become a silo unto myself and do what's right for me. And it's a self-preservation mode that you put so many people into. And I think that's the thing that really, if you're going to step up to the plate, step up to the plate. Mm. You can go play another game when you're done with this, but you have kids what's next or what are we going to do today? And you have to tell them, hey, focus on the moment you're in. When you step up to lead, focus on the moment you're in. Don't be worried about the next part of the legacy. Be worrying about the part of the legacy that you're in, right?
Mm. Yeah, this is definitely not a bystander sport, right? This is definitely something you have to take action and do work. The work is going to define you. Love this. So, as we kind of wrap it up here, we've been on here for close to an hour here, but I just wanted to kind of reflect on some things here. And I do take a ton of notes when I do these kind of things. I'm a writer.
I feel like there's a test that I'm going to fail because I have not been taking notes.
And I always write in cursive because Nick Papa and I were in a class one day and I looked over next to me and he's writing in this beautiful, beautiful like calligraphy type handwriting as he's taking notes. I'm like, bro, what are you doing? He goes, yeah, I just take notes. I'm like, wow, this is beautiful. And I always feel like I'm in competition with him now. He has this beautiful handwriting and I try to keep up and I never do. But, I think in reflecting on this, I'm glad that we were talking about this as we end the year off. And for me, it's like the close of a year in the beginning of a new one. I think about like these kind of things. I think about the people that have influenced me. And I'm glad that we were able to chat about this for a while. I'm glad that you mentioned, I think that was really funny when you mentioned the retirement, like the stages of grief. I think that's very funny. I can totally relate to that. And I totally understand it. I think that we talked about going to work and having fun. I think that, when we sit back and regardless of the calls, regardless of the politics and the banter, we have a good time. And that's so important that our people do that. And there are so many ways to encourage that. And like you said, we talked about some of those, but how many, there's so many laughs that come with this job, and we have to have that to balance out some of the craziness we see, right? The fact that we get to run these calls, and not that we have to, but that we get to run these calls, I do think that one of the most powerful statements you mentioned this is that those that influence you the most were those that took the time, that gave you the time. And we talked about time being one of those things that just, when it's gone, it's gone. It's one of our most valuable commodities, and that the individuals that gave up their time are the ones that kind of resonated with you the most. And I dug that. I think that we mentioned some examples of that. And also the fact that some of these things that left the biggest marks were not exactly huge things. They were small things. They were little things that meant maybe more to us than the other person that was doing them at the time realized they were. I like that you said you don't have control over your legacy, and that led us into a conversation about basically focusing on others, and the fact that when we're focusing on others and it's not about us and it's about other people and not ourselves, then sometimes it writes itself. And I think even now, as we're reflecting on the people that have left those valuable marks on us, it was those that gave of themselves to us to help us grow, build, mature, if you will. I like that you talked about the isolation and the risk that we have of it these days, and the need to reverse engineer that in whatever ways we can, so people can get out of that and enjoy the time they have coming to work with the people they're with the team they're with, for the time they have it. It's so important. I like that as we're ending this, we talked about some of your concerns, and, having leaders that, let's say, don't lead, but the fact that we need to have leaders that actively are leading. This isn't a bystander sport. Leadership takes work. It's not just something you sit back and let happen. So first of all, I appreciate you taking the time, Stephanie, and chatting with me on this. For me, it's almost like a closure of somewhat of a chapter, being that I started this a few years ago on this topic, and we're kind of talking about it near the end of the year right now. But as we're kind of wrapping things up here, and again, not being about us, but for people, what are your final thoughts on this? Like, in other words, as we're thinking about those who have influenced us and that we remember in our minds in a very positive or influential way, what are some of your final thoughts as we kind of close this up?
I know I said it in the beginning, and it seems like such a tiny thing, but do the right thing, not for you, but for the person to the left and right of you. And that, we already said, that helps the legacy write itself. But part of a legacy means that you've stepped away. And when thinking about stepping away, have a plan. I don't think I would have been able to safely step away if I hadn't had something that I was going off into to do in the fire service. In fact, when I retired, my husband's the chief state fire marshal, so he works in the capital of the state. It's a 2-hour difference from where I was assigned. And I said, hey, they laterally hire in the city of Richmond. And he said, you're not getting fired. You're retiring. If you were going to stay in the fire department, you'd stay. No, you don't get to go work somewhere else. And I don't think my thinking was anything new. I think so many of us say, oh, I'm retiring, I'm leaving, I'm stepping away. Oh, but I can go, no. Know when it is time for your family, for yourself, for your body, for your mind, to sit down and to sit this one out, because you can sour your legacy by staying too long. And that legacy is with those around you. My youngest, one day, I had a really bad night, and I came home and I snipped at my kids, and he slumped his shoulder. And he said, oh, you're being angry mommy again. And it just, because I had been trying to focus on my sleep, and I went, these poor kids, this is all they've ever known, is sleep deprived cranky mom. And so realizing that I am about to have 4 teenagers, it is time to step away from the sleep-deprived life. I would run calls until my body broke if I could, but I also have responsibility to these little people over here, because I could have the most amazing legacy in the fire service. But if I'm coming home sleep-deprived every day, I'm going to have a horrible legacy as a parent. And as much as we adore this job, and as much as we adore running the calls or getting to set up a fire department, we forget how much it takes away from those who love us, and who we are in charge of guiding and protecting. So realize that your legacy is probably a dual legacy, and you have to nurture both sides of that. And that might mean leaving one a little earlier than you would like to, because I don't think any of us are ever truly ready to leave this job.
I'm so glad, so glad your child had the wherewithal to tell you that's powerful. My wife, not to one up you or anything, and this is definitely not a one up, because that's a very, very profound statement for a child to say. My wife one day, and this is when I was teaching with a lot. I was teaching for FDIC, my first time teaching at the FDIC and conferences and just out there a lot. My wife comes to me one day and she goes, everybody else gets Happy Steve. They get Instructor Steve, they get Officer Steve, they get Chief Steve, they get the guy throwing the ladder Steve, they get Instructor Paramedic Steve. You know who I get? I get Tired Steve. I get you coming home after all these days and you just want to sleep. You're irritated, just like you just said your kid said to you. So it's a real thing, but to have those conversations, to be aware of it and to voice it and make sure it's, I guess at the end of the day, making sure that, I love that we're ending this conversation in terms of legacy. Well, what legacy are you leaving with your family and overall? That's a whole other talk for another day. You may have given me the next topic of the next conversation I'm having at the beginning of next year, but I'm glad you ended that in terms of the how we started this, having some similarities with the way we started, but also some of the stories we have near the end. But that's a very powerful way to end this. So. But Stephanie, thank you for coming on. I really appreciate it. I enjoyed this talk. It really kind of sets up the year in a very powerful way as we end it, and kind of just gives me a lot of excitement for coming into January. So thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me on. I really love having this discussion now that I've hung up my helmet.
Well, there's always those next chapters, right? And we're going to be seeing a lot of you doing the Firefighter Nation thing. I'm sure that you get to review a lot of articles and all these other things you're doing right now. I'm sure you are busy right now, so I'm sure you're not bored, to say the least. Yeah. All right. So thank you all for listening once again, for tuning in for the Perspectives on Leadership podcast. These episodes drop the second Friday of every month. So this will be out this Friday. As we always do, just thank you for listening to this. We the whole goal for this is to provide value for those who are in the fire service, and I think we did provide a lot of value here today. So as you approach the end of the year, please have a wonderful and safe, happy holidays, and we'll see you in January. Thank you very much for listening. Take care.